capacity to reconcile our differences. And those differences are immense. Let me not exaggerate on the one side or underestimate on the other. The fact that we can reconcile those differences through democracy is what has resulted in our continuing and developing as a modern nation state. Where we are not able to reconcile the differences for two reasons. One is there is abject poverty. And one of the ironic things I find about India, especially when I talk to my American friends in academia, is that it's in some of India's richest states that we have a problem of insurgency. Why? Because the wealth is there under the ground, but the people continue to be poor. It is the commercial interest which comes in, mines, extracts the minerals and metals, takes them away. The people remain exactly. That, to me, explains in some ways the problem of the Maoist insurgency in India. That we were not able, we tried, we were not successful in ensuring that the fruits of economic development percolate down to the grassroots level where individuals do not have a sense of marginalization and alienation. Well, let me not oversimplify. The Maoist insurgency is not just about abject poverty. There are other issues, but that I think the state always develops a response mechanism, and to the extent that you are able to handle it effectively in some occasions, not effectively in others, that's something the state comes to. Where else does democracy help you? Well, to start with, I think the era of a very strong central government, it's a federal polity, strong central government being able to run the day-to-day affairs of states, the era of where somebody sitting in Delhi could dismiss a chief minister and say Tamil Nadu, or a chief minister in Maharashtra. That's gone. That's gone. First of all, democracy has proved that for any single political party to get 272, which is a working majority in the lower house, is almost impossible. Now, please, I know I'm on record. I'm not saying this cannot happen. All I'm saying in the last few years, it has not happened. You've needed a coalition government, which is not a bad thing, because a coalition government means you have to co-opt different parties which are centered in states. But then, if you have too many coalition partners and each one of them is extracting a price, then you have an overall system gets slowed down. You had a period when the communists were responsible for the government staying afloat in the first phase of the UPA coalition, and we had problems because they would not allow economic reforms to proceed. Today, it's different. So ideally, democracy brings you this ability to reconcile differences. But democracy also means you have to go and cater to the individual interests because it has arithmetical capacity to undermine your survival in the parliament.
I come back to population because somehow it fascinates me. You spoke about 136 million increase. That is a very virile population.
Very virile.
Is it because the Indians are more virile than others, or is it because there's not enough electricity in the country, so the nights are longer, and so you produce more children?
No, the earlier it used to be said because there was no other entertainment available, so that is how you got it. But I think Bollywood is the world's largest industry, and I think this basic industry. How many do we make? 1,000 films a year? We have a roaring. How do you put it, television entertainment based. No, I think on a serious level, 2 or 3 things have happened. Rate of growth has slowed down very sharply, very sharply. Most educated families and people who are doing very well have a 1 child or a maximum 2 child family. I come from a traditional middle class Indian family. My mother and father both who were born in Peshawar and Rawalpindi, had large number of brothers and sisters. I'm in a family of 2, me plus my brother. Each one of us has only 2 children, and that has become the norm in the urban district. There are very strong regional and religious differences. Some communities do not follow this one or two, which are traditional reasons. There may be other reasons. But by and large, I think now there is acute realization that it's good to provide for children well, and that a small family is better. And I think the situation is changing. But sir, when the base level is high, then even a small rate of growth means adding Australia every day. I don't think it's every year. I don't think it's the virility of the individual as the large base level. And if you get a 1% growth on a billion, that's a lot.
You were courteous enough to refer to Pakistan's endorsement of India in the Security Council elections. That reminded me, and you also referred to the fact that we were both in Geneva at the same time. In Geneva, we found that whenever India and Pakistan come together, and they did for an extended period of time in the World Trade Organization negotiations, when India and Pakistan come together, it is a force to be reckoned with globally. And I know it personally that enormous efforts were made from other countries, and we won't name them out of politeness for the soil on which we stand. Enormous efforts were made to break that relationship between India and Pakistan during the Uruguay round negotiations. And so the question that I want to ask you is it possible that the tense relations between India and Pakistan are something which is of benefit to foreign countries and which they therefore encourage because it suits them to prevent India and Pakistan from coming together?
Ambassador, if I were to respond to that question over a 50-year or a 30-year or a 20-year span, I would agree with you. But I think what you are suggesting is something very serious, and I think each situation in terms of point of time requires a specific analysis. I am not prepared to believe at this point of time that our inability to resolve our problems is entirely due to, let's say, our friends in the West, loosely said, not one. In fact, my own feeling is at this point of time, our friends in the West would want us to cooperate. We have sensitivities. India is very sensitive to the suggestion that there should be a third party in these discussions. Pakistan, on the other hand, has its own sensitivities, but I continue to remain an optimist. And I believe that when countries are facing challenges, as indeed both our countries are now, one a little more than the other, it is in our interest not only to come together. I was present in Geneva when the Uruguay round was negotiated, and I think the then Pakistani delegation and the Indian delegation, I was part of the Indian delegation earlier, and I was part of the secretariat at that point of time. I mean, how does an attack in terms of the intellectual property regime, how is it different for Pakistan or India? Why aren't India's interest in export of textiles and clothing exactly the same as Pakistan's? Is it not in both countries' interest that the restrictions on tropical products should be removed? So that was the situation then, and that is the situation now. If you look at the UN and how we function, Geneva WTO is a case in point, WIPO is a case in point, in World Intellectual Property Organization. ILO is a case in point, International Labour Organization. If you tabulate what India and Pakistan negotiate in multilateral fora, other than one issue, I think on most others we are on the same page. And I think that is the challenge, to try and pursue those issues. When my distinguished colleague from Pakistan, my colleagues from Bangladesh, Nepal, Nigeria, Morocco, and India, when we sought a meeting with the Secretary General of the United Nations because we said we wanted to come and discuss peacekeeping, you should have seen the reverberations there were in the Secretariat. Because Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India are the largest 3 troop contributors. We have at any given point of time 9 or 10,000 troops on the ground.